Welcome everyone. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to our Anti-Black Racism event hosted by the Canadian Multicultural Lead Organization for Mentoring and Training. My name is Olamide and I would be facilitating / introducing our amazing speakers today. So just before we get started, I would like to start off with the land acknowledgement. As treaties people on the Turtle Island, we are obligated to uphold treaties made from a long time ago. Where I am situated, I would like to acknowledge the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. I also want to thank the First Peoples for their ongoing teaching of how we are able to learn on the land and from the land in partnership with each other, the animals, and the plants. So before we get started, I also like to introduce our amazing speakers for tonight. So we have Nicole Baxter-Lynn and Camilla Clayton. So Nicole is the co-founder and vice president of the Canadian Multicultural Lead Organization for Mentoring or Training. Currently, she is a provincial equity leadership facilitator, and she's also the equity teacher facilitator coordinator who oversees a team of anti-racist, anti-oppression consultants within the York Region District School Board. And then we also have Camilla, who is a registered social worker with over 10 years of experience working with children, youth, and families. Camilla has a private practice in Whitby, Ontario, where she specializes in issues of anxiety, depression, stress, and racial identity. Camilla is committed to providing quality mental health counseling and programming to members of the African Canadian communities. So without further ado, I would like to introduce both of them. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you so much, Olamide. We've been chatting over email, and so it's great to finally put a face to the name and warm energy that you've been sharing with Nicole and I over the past couple of weeks. Welcome to everyone that has joined us for this amazing learning opportunity this evening on a very important topic that continues to be at the center of many conversations and we hope remains on the table for as long as it takes to dismantle it. Today, we are going to be talking about anti-Black racism and the Standing Against Anti-Black Racism webinar, learning opportunity, workshop, whatever you'd like to call it. We are hopeful that you will take away a lot of learning today and things that you can implement into your life and daily practice. So for the purposes of today, Nicole and I are going to be focusing a lot of our energy on talking about anti-Black racism as it applies to the education system. Nicole has extensive experience at different within the education system in different roles, and I have a passion for race equity as it relates to the education system. And so it just made sense that we would begin our conversation with a system that we both have a lot of passion in terms of shifting and changing and making sure that Black students and Black staff have different experiences than they have in the past. So I'll just share a little bit more about myself. And I do believe that it is important to locate myself in the work that I do and provide an insight into the lens through which I approach my work and some of the blind spots that I may have. I identify first and foremost as a cisgendered heterosexual Black woman, a mother, a daughter, and a sister. I'm also a child of the African diaspora, and so much of my learning and life shifts over the past 5 to 6 years have focused on deepening my connection to the continent of Africa. And I'm really, proud to say, or happy to say, that it has allowed me to shift the way I relate to people who look like me and the way I support people's understanding of what it means to honor and support Black people when they don't identify as such. So these are just a few of the identities that I carry with me and that inform how I move through the world on a day-to-day basis. And my entry point to this work is as an advocate for Black mental health and wellness, with a focus on challenging systems that support and actively participate in anti-Black racism, and supporting those that are ready to do the work to affirm Black identities. I don't always get things right, and I may not have all of the answers, but I am on a reflexive journey of learning and doing in harmony. And I hope that by participating in this training today, that you are as well.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Nicole Bachelin. My apologies. I have had a bit of issues with my camera and computer, so I am going to just turn off my camera right now just to ensure that all goes well here. So um, as mentioned in the introduction, so I am a co-founder and vice president here with the Canadian Multicultural Lead organization, and I am an equity coordinator with the York Region District School Board. And essentially, what does that mean? I oversee a team of equity consultants who basically co-develop and co-deliver learning that's grounded in anti-racist and anti-oppression practices for individual schools from kindergarten to grade 12, as well as engage in regional collaborations with various school board stakeholders. I also support our graduation coaches for Black students, which is a new Ontario Provincial Ministry of Education initiative. And I provide system-wide equity support for approximately 12,000 employees, impacting over 128,000 students board-wide. Um, However, I want to start off a little bit differently, and I wanted to go back to my connection here to the Canadian Multicultural Lead organization, where I work in close partnership with several other inspiring Black women co-founders that includes Kathy Joseph, who's a vice principal in Peel, Wendy Beckles, who's the president and CEO of Shepherd Village, and Dr. Juliet Daniels, who's an acting associate dean of research and science at McMaster University, who, and I love sharing this Black excellence, Black joy, Black pride. Through her research, Dr. Daniel had discovered a gene involved in breast cancer and had named it KYSO. However, I wanted to point this out too, that following what was known as the Year of the Gun in Toronto, where there was a front page spread of about 50 Black faces in the Toronto Star, and the faces were of mostly young Black male teens who were murdered, we came together to do something, anything that could possibly prevent seeing more Black teens from prematurely dying. And after 2 years of intentional researching and planning, our organization was birthed. And since then, we've had the honor of extending our LEAD family to include students of different intersecting social identities. 15 years later, since the inception of our flagship LEAD program, we still remain connected with the students who are now adults that are encouraging others to dare to dream, similar to how we supported them with unconditional care as valued village members. And I share this story with you because, regardless of their identities, these students shared with us common stories of being misunderstood in their schools, being streamed, silenced, overlooked, dismissed, pathologized, and for some, dehumanized. For them, school was a place of harm. And I share this with you because whenever you think that there is nothing that you can do, that thought has got to be interrupted and definitely replaced with several other questions, such as how can I work in partnership with students who have experienced marginalization in a school system that is built to exclude people who do not assimilate with whiteness? How do I intentionally disrupt systemic racism and non-neutral policies, practices, and procedures that perpetuate inequities, disproportionalities, and disparities for Black youth? And how am I getting ready to be ready to address anti-Black racism in all spaces and places that I traverse? With the learning that we have in place today, I'm definitely honored to be co-leading it with my formidable co-facilitator and partner, Camila, whose experience as a clinician with her work, as she mentioned before, grounded in Afrocentric practice is not only just critical, it is imperative. We already shared a land acknowledgement at the beginning, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to continue to pass that.
Keep on having to remember to unmute myself when I need to speak. So this saying, Sawubona Sikona, is a declaration of intent to fully inhabit this moment. It symbolizes a willingness to engage with integrity and humility. And when you translate this Zulu proverb, it means I see you and I am here to be seen. Black people, people of African descent, want and need to be seen. and not just through the acknowledgement of their presence in spaces that they inhabit and not through, the white gaze. They also need to see themselves represented in positions of power and leadership and in a wide range of professions that fall both within and outside of that those that are expected of people of African descent. They also need to be able to share a range of emotions and not have those emotions weaponized and be called the angry Black woman or the aggressive Black man. And a part of the work that I do as a mental health clinician is to support Black women in particular with being seen and accepted in their totality and in their wholeness, so that they don't have to walk on eggshells and worry about how they're presenting themselves to the world. They can just be themselves and know that people like me and Nicole and others who are doing the work of honoring Black identities see them. So when Black people don't feel as though they're seen or affirmed in their interactions with people that either look like them or don't look like them, and the systems that they interact with, that invisibility and erasure can take a significant toll on their overall health and well-being. Nicole and I, as I shared, are going to focus a lot on the education system, but we would both, I think, share or agree that a lot of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today can apply to multiple systems. And so if you don't work specifically in education, we still encourage you to think about how you can apply what we're sharing to the space that you are working in or that you inhabit. And so we want to make sure that we are supporting a space that, to talk about this incredibly important issue is a space where everyone feels welcome to learn and share and support one another. And so just a quick overview of the community commitments that Nicole and I have come up with. We are a community, and so we do see every opportunity to be in space with anyone as an opportunity to build community. And the energy that we're going to be sharing with one another today, we hope will carry forward into your interactions with other people. We're encouraging everyone to embody receiving energy. So listen with intention, and please just take in everything that is being said without trying to dissect where people are coming from. Everybody should feel that they can share in this space safely. We want you to sit with your emotions and then reflect. So if there's something that Nicole or I say that's causing you to feel a particular way, we want you to sit with that, sit with the discomfort and reflect on why you feel that way. We want you to commit to change as we have committed to change, because this shouldn't be another offering that is a check mark in your list of things to do or a drop in your bucket list. This really is about doing the work of changing so that people of African descent and people who look like Nicole and I can have different outcomes, and our children and future generations can also have different outcomes. We also want you to remember that discomfort is necessary for change. And so engage with the discomfort. As I shared on the previous slide, discomfort is a necessary component of change. It can be very difficult to lean into, but you can't actually claim to be committed to doing this work of addressing anti-Black racism unless you're willing to engage with the discomfort. So when you feel stuck or uncomfortable, it helps to sit not just with your emotions, but also to do some breathing exercises. So one that I enjoy doing is taking, breathing in to the count of 4, holding for 2 seconds, and then breathing out to the count of 4. Just allowing you to check in with yourself, check in with your emotions. And then if there's a need to respond or even repeat that exercise, you can do that. And so this well-known African proverb, until the tale of the hunt is told by the lion, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter, is so important. And we see this as representing the need to center and amplify the stories and experiences of Black people as they tell it. Particularly those that have experienced anti-Black racism and are able to identify that they have. Far too often, people of African descent share their experiences of anti-Black racism and they are dismissed, or the person that they're sharing with will try and create an alternate narrative that centers the person that engaged in the egregious action as opposed to holding space for the person who is on the receiving end of anti-Black racism. And so it's important to remember that the intent of the person who is engaging in harmful behavior is not relevant, right? Although it may appear to be innocent or their intention was not to cause harm, the person who has been harmed needs to be at the center, and their story matters and it is important. And if we think about this within the context of education, we can kind of shift the narrative around Black students. Instead of asking, why are Black students failing in school, what we should be asking is, why are schools failing Black children, and how can we use the information and stories that they share with us to inform the way forward. So I am now going to play a video, and hopefully the sound is okay for everyone.
Camilla, I don't think we can hear the sound.
Sorry, you can hear. Sorry. It's the problem of operating off of two screens. So I'm wondering if it is possible maybe to share this video at the end of the presentation rather than starting over. Could anybody hear?
No, I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it either.
Oh boy, okay. I don't know what the workaround is. So you know what, we'll just share this video with everyone at the end. Sorry about that, everyone.
Just to make sure you were sharing your sound, right?
I clicked to share the sound, so I'm not sure what happened, but that's okay. That's okay,
Yeah.
we'll push forward. So we have a reflection question that we want everybody to kind of sit with for a bit. And if you're open to putting a response in the chat or coming off mute and sharing your reflection, we're open to that as well. So think about a time that you engaged with discomfort. How did it feel and what did you learn?
I can share something. It's Patricia Cotner speaking.
Hi, Patricia.
Thank you for this presentation. I've enjoyed what I've heard already. So, Black professional in the school system, and I went to a conference, and the conference was a small conference. So you have small rooms where there's about 20 people, and the facilitator wanted, introduce himself and ask the group to indicate where they're from, as in school board. I was the third person, only visible minority, third person to give my story. And he said to me, "Well, no, 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 where are you from?" And so I said, "Where am I from?" I said, "Oh, Campbellville." And I know what he meant, but I I was not going to give in. So I said, "What do you I Campbellville?" He goes, "No, no, no, no. Where are you?" And I'm not kidding. Where are, as if I don't understand what he's saying. So I said, "Well, okay. Oh, you mean my mom's tummy?" I was being very facetious, but I wasn't going to. And the funny thing was, the lady next to me was from Russia, and the minute she opened her mouth, you knew she was recently immigrant to Canada. And so I must tell you, I was pleasantly surprised when before she started, she said, "I found that insulting."
Mm.
Remember, there are two others before me who answered, indicated their board, and that was sufficient. Because I look the way I look, there's no way I could be from here. So, and also with my accent, which I hold on to. because my parents gave it to me and I hold on to it. So anyway, it was very uncomfortable because at first I thought, oh my gosh, I felt like an antagonist, right? Because I was not answering the way I know he wanted to. But I guess it was my way of saying, think about what you're asking me. I gave
Mhm.
him 3 opportunities and he still didn't get it. So,
Mhm. And I'm so happy that you shared that example, Patricia, because it is this constant feeling like a foreigner, excuse me, even when you've got centuries of history in this country. You know, there are so many aspects of Canada that were built on the backs of Black people, and yet we are erased from the history books and we are not allowed to be quote unquote Canadian, whatever that stands for. And so I appreciate you sharing that example. And I love your response. I think if I ever have to engage in a conversation like that, I'm going to take a page out of your book. Thank you. Would anybody else like to share before we move on? Going once, going twice.
Hello?
Hi, Blessing, go ahead.
Did you hear me?
You're very
Hi, how are
faint.
you? Great. So my experience happened while I was in as I was a student teacher in my program, and um, I was in a kindergarten placement, and I work with the York Region School Board. But this was 2 years ago while I was in my placement, and I was in a kindergarten class, and the ECE had made a comment basically like, oh, she said to the teacher, I would have brought more snacks, but my boyfriend eats them like a starving child in Africa. And I'm just standing there like, no, this did not come out of her mouth. And she did not see anything wrong with what she said. Like she was continuing eating her snacks, and the teacher was trying to like alert her and like, like, hey, like the obvious person here in the room is African, and you're standing here and you're saying that, like, and she's just like what? And then she told her like, no, you can't say that and all that stuff. And I felt really conflicted because I was just like, if I say something, like I'm getting graded, is that going to affect my grades? If I say something, like what happens? And I was in a school where like I was the only like colored teacher in the school. And I felt okay there. But when I heard that comment, I started to become aware of myself. And so I would not go to staff rooms. I would sit in the classroom or like sit in my car at lunch because I didn't know how to feel. I didn't know if that's how everybody saw me, and I didn't say anything. And now I do wish that I had, but it just made me think like, how would that conversation end if I wasn't in the room? Would the teacher still try to defend me, or would they laugh it off? Would it be a joke? Right. So it just really just put things into perspective for me that like people really need to be educated. Like it's not okay, like especially working in such a vulnerable space and making those jokes, right? What about the 2 colored kids in the class as well? Like, how do you see them? Do you see us all as starving people? Right? And Canada's full of people that lack food and resources every day, right? Why did we have to make a reference to a starving child in Africa? So from that experience, I did learn to speak up. So I've been learning a lot by attending workshops like these, and to do more with my privilege, do more with what I have, right? So, yeah.
Thank you for that sharing, Blessing. And I want to be conscious of time, Nicole, and I have a lot of information to share. If I could just offer one reframe in terms of how we describe ourselves as Black people or other folks that don't identify as white. Um, so Nicole and I generally tend to use the word racialized. I know that some people use, people of color, other people use colored. Those colored is a really colonial term, and it doesn't speak to the totality of our experiences as Black people or the experiences of other communities. So we like to just encourage the use of either how you identify, so a person of African descent or Black, or racialized, if you're talking about a multitude of people that don't all identify in the same way. Just a shift in the language. And I hope that that is helpful for you. But thank you so much for sharing your experience and for like taking from that an opportunity to build your own resilience and your ability to self-advocate. It is so important. And I'm sure that the students that saw you, if they saw you, will learn something from that experience. So thank you.
So I believe that we found another way to show the video that we weren't able to show. I
Okay.
did share the link with our moderator and
Okay.
wondering if maybe they can show the video right now.
So let me unshare my.
Yes, for some reason we can't hear anything.
Yeah.
Gonna let that word hurt you.
Who said that?
The lady at the store.
That is not a compliment.
Listen, it's an ugly, nasty word, and you are gonna hear it. Nothing I can do about that. But you are not gonna let that word hurt you. You hear me? There are some people who think you don't deserve the same privileges just because of what you look like. It's not fair. It's not. Remember, you can do anything they can. The difference is you gotta work twice as hard and be twice as smart.
Come straight home after practice. You got your ID? Oh, guess I stopped you. How's your review?
We're good.
You good?
Yeah,
You see?
we're good.
Okay, good. Now, when you get pulled over,
I'm a good driver. Okay?
baby,
Don't worry.
this is not about you getting a ticket. This is about you not coming home.
I'm gonna be okay. Right? Okay, baby.
It's not fair. But you keep showing up.
You are not pretty for a black girl. You are beautiful, period. Okay? Don't ever forget that.
So this clip, the first time Nicole showed it to me was so impactful because it represents the talk or the talks that Black parents have no choice but to have with their children in order to keep them safe in the world. And none of the talks in the video demonstrated or talked about, you know, how Black children can keep themselves safe in school, but we know that these are life-saving conversations. And so if you are an educator or you support someone who is, you know, actively engaged in the school system, think about the different conversations that perhaps you have had with them in order to keep them safe or make sure that they are well cared for. It's so important that we, you know, make sure that our children feel equipped to be not only in the world, but also in school, this place where they are told they are supposed to feel safe all the time. I don't know if anybody has a reaction that they'd like to share as I start sharing my screen again.
I can definitely speak to, you know, some of the things that I've been seeing in the school, and I apologize if my voice sounds very sort of solemn. And I would say the reason is when you hear on an ongoing basis about some of the harmful things that are happening, the harmful things that people are saying. People saying they don't want to play with other children because of their skin color, or they don't have quote unquote princess hair, and the list goes on and on and on. And I see the impact that it has on children from the moment they enter school and kindergarten, and if they are able to survive secondary school, let alone even post-secondary. These are, it's greater than cuts. It's so much more. It's shaped the identities of people. We carry this with us wherever we go. And it's even more disheartening when you see how that harm continues to persist. And you ask yourself and you wonder, do people see me? Do they hear me? Do they value me? Do I have any worth? It's 2021, and we're thinking that things should change. And yet, through the actions, through the engagements that we have, through the encounters we find, wherever our settings may be, it's constantly being reinforced in terms of how we are seen, and what worth that we have. And I know something that my parents would instill in me. And I am triracial. I identify as Black, and my parents are from the Caribbean. And they would say from the moment that I can remember is that, you know, you and your brother, you are Black. You have to work 2, 3, 4, 5 times as hard. And that is just an ongoing thing that we do. But it also comes at a cost as well. So when I hear this, when I see this video and hear what's being said, I wish, and I hope that one day I will get to a point and say, remember when that used to happen from a long time ago? Instead of, remember when that happened earlier this morning? Yeah, so I just wanted to share some thoughts there, and then Camilla, I'll just hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Nicole. Your perspective, I think, throughout our friendship has been so valuable in understanding firsthand from somebody who is an educator within the system and supports young people, just how important it is to be fully engaged with this work. So thank you for sharing. So what is anti-Black racism? It is policies that are rooted, or policies and practice, excuse me, that are rooted in Canadian institutions such as education, healthcare, and justice that mirror and reinforce beliefs and attitudes, prejudice, stereotyping, and or discrimination towards people of Black African descent. And this definition is a reminder of just how embedded anti-Black racism is in schools and other systems. And so it often operates invisibly. But Black people who experience anti-Black racism have visceral reactions, even if they can't describe or define what they're experiencing. And these can have long-term effects on their health and well-being. So white supremacy, we cannot have a conversation or a meaningful conversation about anti-Black racism unless we talk about what's at the root. So white supremacy refers to a system of power that seeks to benefit white people. It's a hierarchy that designates Black people as less than full human beings, as disposable labor, as chattel, and has been used to justify European imperialist conquest and exploitation in Africa, America, Asia, and Oceania. And the invisible nature of whiteness allows it to go unchecked. It's assumed to be the norm. And in doing so, it privileges white people and doesn't question the history of brutality that allows white people to win all the time. And so this is, the part of the conversation that through our experience, people start to feel really, really uncomfortable. But as we shared at the beginning, we want you to sit with that discomfort. And if you identify as white, think about the privileges that you have that you didn't have to work for, that just come as a matter of being in terms of your existence. And think about the different ways that you can or have disrupted white supremacy. What have you given up in order for somebody else to be able to have advantages that they, otherwise would have had to have worked 10 times as hard for? And so we really just want you, again, to engage with the discomfort and think about how you can actively engage in disrupting white supremacy. So anti-Black racism in Canada often goes unspoken. It's assumed to exist in another time, so centuries ago, or in another place, often in the United States. It's linked to an economic system of using Black bodies for labor. And as I talked about before, so many aspects of this country were built on the backs of Black labor, and that goes unacknowledged. It's normalized in Canadian institutions, policies, and practices. And it's an erasure of Black representation in public institutions, including education. An example of this is a null curriculum, and I believe that Nicole will talk about this in a bit. So we have a poll question. Olamide, if you could launch the first one, thank you so much. So I can't see it from my screen because the poll is right in the middle. But are white people the only ones that benefit from white supremacy or whiteness?
Can you see the results, Camilla?
I don't know if I have privileges to.
Oh, I see.
There you go. You did. All right. So 16% said yes, 68% said no, and 16% said I'm not sure. And so the answer to the question actually is no. Whiteness is, and its polar opposite, anti-Blackness, are so embedded in systems and societies that, sorry, the poll just keeps jumping in front of me, that even in the absence of having, visible presence of white people, like whiteness is everywhere, and it can be, non-white people can benefit from white supremacy based on their adjacency to whiteness. And so it doesn't only benefit white people.
Okay, so let's think about what does anti-Black racism look like in schools? And if you ever have a chance to read any of the work from Ramon St. Vincent, he was a TDSB administrator. He had compiled some information. So it looks like this. We see more office referrals. We see an overrepresentation in terms of suspension and expulsion. We see a disproportionate number of our Black youth are given referrals to special education, non-gifted. We see there's lower expectations, underrepresentation in academic award recipients. There's also overrepresentation in athletic award recipients. When there's conflicts, they're often seen as the aggressors. They are assessed as having poor learning skills and work habits, and we see an overrepresentation in terms of behavior programs. In addition to that, and I hear this so often, I don't see color. Yet the outcomes sees color and seems to be able to sort it based on race, even gender, and even class. But going back to the focus here on anti-Black racism in schools, there's also lots of assumptions, erroneous assumptions that are made, and I hear this often too with regards to parents. They're deemed as being unsupported. We also see streaming happening, and there's an overrepresentation in some of the lower stream programs. They're quite often, Black youth are identified as being in need of some sort of mentor or positive role model, to be saved and to be fixed. They are less likely to have educators that look like them. So when one of our participants said that, they were like the only one in their school, that is still not uncommon here in 2021. The Blackness, and then every time February comes around, we're told over and over again, it's relegated to slavery because that's, what people believe where we started from, as opposed to the greatness that we come from. We see that there's a higher push out rate, and there's also the school to prison pipeline. So both historically and contemporarily, schools are places of harm for Black students, which I had mentioned earlier on, especially when risk factors are ignored and dismissed. And notice I said risk factors as opposed to calling Black students at risk. Um, we also know that schools become places of harm when the curriculum only presents a single narrative portrayal of the Black identity that actually both pathologizes and criminalizes the Black bodies. This also occurs in terms of harm persistent when acknowledgements of Black contributions are excluded, or as I mentioned before, when Black history is only seen as starting from slavery as opposed to the greatness associated with Kemet, the great African kingdoms, and even present Black greatness exuded by people like we have the Parents of Black Children System navigator, Charlene Grant. We have community activists. We have academics like Dr. Bettina Love, Dr. Carl James, Natasha Henry, Dr. Candy Abraham, and I'm going to throw out there Dr. Julia Daniels as well. And then it goes on and on and on. But I want you to take a close look at the picture on the right-hand side, where they talk about the 5 S's of the school to prison pipeline, where it starts off from the moment we have our Black children, especially when I see young Black males enter the school system, they're first stigmatized. And this is that overrepresentation with regards to that special education identification, non-gifted, right? Then we see there's a segregation that sort of happens. Then there's the censorship that happens, being silenced. We see them being suppressed, and last but not least, sentenced. And not sure if any of you are familiar with this, but this is also what you're seeing here is an image of what they call a credit counseling summary. This is more so at the secondary high school level. And what I find is that credit counseling summaries, they actually share a story. And they, yes, show what are some of the achievements, past achievements that students have earned based on the courses that they took. And quite often when I would meet with guidance counselors, I would hear things like, I don't see race, I see grades. And when those comments are made, they actually are all in alignment with this notion of meritocracy, which is a myth. And what meritocracy ascribes is that student success and achievement is actually based on the individual. And so if a child is not achieving, it's because also of the individual. However, meritocracy is a myth because there is no acknowledgement of the barriers that students repeatedly confront and endure from the moment they've entered the education system, let alone when we think of some of the interlocking systems from the moment a racialized woman is pregnant with their child. And so we're talking about their interaction with the healthcare system. We have also, talking about housing and finances, and it goes on and on and on. But going back to this thing here about meritocracy, the thing that we don't necessarily talk about and recognize is that it does not take into consideration the system of whiteness. And again, whiteness as an ideology, not talking as an individual, but as an ideology of power, right? That our educational system is actually built upon. And nor does meritocracy also acknowledge, as I said, those interlocking systems that lead to similar outcomes for Black students and families. And I'm sharing this with you, this slide, which was actually focusing on the roots of youth violence. And as I said earlier on in my introduction, when I said, that 2005 year of the gun, and again, never forget the 50-page spread of predominantly young Black males who were killed far too soon. As a result of that, there was this roots of youth violence that was commissioned by the government. And I believe Alan Curling was one of the individuals who was overseeing this. And in 2008, there was this 468-page report that was shared. And I just want to share with you a highlight. And notice that I did put some emphasis here on the guidance counselors and challenges because that continues to create a barrier within schools. But some of the main things that they were saying here within this Roots of Youth Violence report is that education was identified as the root of the immediate risk factors for Black youth, and that there were 5 problematic elements of the Ontario education system that started with first the Safe Schools policies. And if you recall, there was during the Mike Harris days, there was a zero tolerance piece, which had a horrible, horrendous outcome on Black students who were definitely by far overrepresented in terms of suspension and expulsions, right? There was the curriculum itself. So when we talk about the null curriculum, we're talking about a lack of acknowledgement and recognition of the contributions that Black people have made in all disciplines. That seems to be erased. And when that is not included, the unintended impact that it has is it conveys to our youth and even those who are delivering this learning that as Black people, we are of no worth, no value because we have not contributed, when the reality is that our history and our contributions have been completely either co-opted or erased. The other thing is, and still the approach taken by guidance counselors where we see streaming happening, and the composition and training of the teaching force. Lastly, the way the education system contributes to the criminalization of Black youth. This was again in 2008, it's 2021, and I wonder what has changed.
Sorry, so the only way to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it and then dismantle it. And Nicole and I really want through this presentation to offer an opportunity to enhance everyone's understanding of anti-Black racism and the way in which it operates. And we've talked about the fact that, whiteness and white supremacy and anti-Black racism largely operate in very invisible ways, although it is felt viscerally by people of African descent or people that identify as Black. And so being able to bring to light and identify and keep conversations about race on the table, it helps us to better be able to identify and describe it. And we can only dismantle if we are able to start with those pieces of being able to recognize when it is happening and how it is happening. And so everybody needs to be engaged in these conversations. It isn't just for, the people like myself and Nicole and others that are experiencing it to make sure that these conversations stay alive. We all have a role to play in dismantling anti-Black racism and racism in general. So I have another reflection question for you. Within your life and work, how have you intentionally disrupted anti-Black racism? I think we have time for 1 or 2 responses. Safer space, no judgment, only support. And if you're sitting just in reflection, that's okay. We want to make sure that you feel comfortable to participate in the way that feels right for you. I would encourage everyone, if you can't think of an example that you're comfortable sharing or you're struggling to come up with, a time that you have intentionally disrupted anti-Black racism, think about, active steps that you can take to do so. Because as I said in the previous slide, this work belongs to all of us, not just the people who are experiencing it.
Hi, I have an example. My name is Barbara Ross. I'm a social worker. I attended McMaster University, and that was in, I guess that'd be 1993, 95. But in a class I took at that time, so it was a while back, but a class I took at that time, out of the class, it was so challenging, this particular class on racism, and just it ended up being such a heavy class, and people walking out and people crying, and an excellent professor, Pat Danzer. And out of that class, a group of us under the tutelage of two of the professors started a committee for anti-racist education that survived quite a while in the School of Social Work at McMaster. So I have to give them props for that. So out of one class and a few voices came a committee that did a lot of work within the school for a number of years. So it was challenging and rooted, I think, in a lot of discomfort, but it was good support from the university, the social work school at that time, quite early on in terms of we need to address this. So the sad part is it feels like there's no end. It's I think back and I think that was how many years ago, and I'm still hearing the same story today.
And as Nicole said, thank you so much for sharing, Barbara. As Nicole said, we look forward to the day when we can talk about experiences of anti-Black racism as something that happened a long time ago. But I am not hopeful that we'll be able to do that in this generation. I know that, both Nicole and I are working very hard so that the world can be different for our children. And so we just have to continue to push and fight. And I am heartbroken that things don't feel any different than they did like 20, 30 years ago. But it gives us, I think, fuel and energy to continue this fight with even more passion and vigor. So thank you for your sharing, Barbara. Anyone else want to share quickly before I move on? You have a lot more material to cover.
I think Patricia has her hand up.
Oh,
Thank you. And by the way, Barb, it's Patricia Codner. We went to university together. Hey. For Dr. Sally Palmer, who was one of our professors who really guided and shepherded us in that space where we were very uncomfortable. I want to just add, first of all, everything you've said resonates with me. I spent 20 odd years in the school board, so I'm very much familiar with what you're talking about. And it's sad that fast forward 20 odd years, we're still talking about it. And to your point, Camille, is that I think it's going to take a long time, and here's why. It predicates on economics. Those with power are not going to give it up. And so it's going to take a massive collaboration with all our folks joined together to make this happen. And, it's very difficult when people are downtrodden, oppressed for generation to have the strength, to have the wherewithal. And so it seems impossible. I'm still hopeful as a grandmother with two beautiful Black granddaughters, that we can. But I agree. I don't think I will be around to see it. But with younger people like yourselves doing the work you're doing and promoting Black excellence, which we really need to talk about a lot more because it's not used in our school, and really have those disruptive conversations. Until we dismantle our current educational structure and reconstruct it, we're going to find that we're producing similar situations that has been around for centuries. So I just want to say thank you for championing this topic, and glad to know that there are many soldiers out there doing the work that some of us are doing as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. We consider you one of our elders. And so we will continue this work on your behalf and on behalf of all of the elders and ancestors who have fought so that we could even sit here and have this conversation in an open forum. So thank you for your sharing, and we continue on for you and our children and the generations to follow.
And so as someone who is standing on your shoulders, Patricia, and others who are also in this space, we do continue to journey on and try to ensure that people have a solid understanding of what the journey has been, which is truly a story of resistance. And that is something that persists as important. And through this learning, Camilla and I, we like to share with people a little bit about Canadian history and going deeper, because going back to what Raman Maynard would say is that there's this myth out there that, that only happens in America, that doesn't happen here. And they're blown away and they're like, wait a second, it actually is happening here. And so I want to start by talking about Sankofa, which is an Afrocentric term in the name of an Adinkra symbol, which means go back and get it. And retrieving critical information that was not shared with us is important because it will fill in some knowledge gaps and assist us with moving forward in an informed way, especially pertaining to anti-Black racism. So here, as you're taking a look at this slide here, in 1964, as a part of a continued resistance to white supremacy, MPP Leonard Braithwaite put forth a motion to rescind the Separate Schools Act, which had permitted schools to be segregated since 1850, when a white settler loyalist by the name of Egerton, white settler loyalists had actually lobbied the superintendent of education, who is the name of Sir Egerton Ryerson, which led to the birth of what they called the Common Schools Act of 1850. Prior to then, segregated schools were illegal. Yet, from that time, we still see segregation persists. It just looks a little different. The last segregated school in Ontario closed in 1965 in Colchester. And what's even more shocking is when we think of the last segregated school in Canada was in Nova Scotia, and that one closed in 1983. So what then was the outcome of what I just talked about with the Separate Schools Act being amended and parts of the Ontario Schools Act rescinded? Well, the outcome of this was an integrated educational system that did what? Well, if you take a look at the red, what we have here, it created a path to disparities and disproportionalities for Black students. We see that the Black schools were closed, Black educators and administrators were removed, and we still have not recovered from that. Black children were then asked to be or forced to be integrated into formerly all white spaces with people who have perhaps never even mingled with them or had any understanding or relationships with the Black community. And what did it ultimately do? Well, I don't think that we did it right, because it puts the burden of this integration onto our Black students, where they were the ones who had to teach others who were not like them or from their community or even value them about Black people. And I have to say, that has not changed. That is still the same thing. And this is a legacy that needs to stop, because if we don't stop, then the outcomes are going to continue to persist.
Sorry, I was muted again. Absolutely, Nicole. And I thank you for sharing that and laying the context that it is not too far in our history that schools continue to be segregated. And there is, this long legacy of systems that are set up to fail Black students. And so the impact is that their mistreatment taught them to hate due to the racism that they endured. And from a mental health perspective, some of the experiences or the outcomes of these experiences of what I would, deem racial trauma is depression, anxiety, self-doubt, hypervigilance, mood, issues around mood, impact to their sleep, headaches, difficulty interacting with others, and a lack of ability to trust, among other things. But what I want to do now is take a moment to pause, because I don't want there to be this perception that Black students are walking around as like the walking wounded. There are so many examples of Black joy and Black happiness and Black resilience in our children. I mean, when you think about some of the things that they have to endure and experience, you wonder how they're able to wake up every morning and go to school. And so they are finding so many ways, despite the lack of support that they're experiencing or not experiencing, in the school system, they are finding ways to celebrate who they are. And again, finding Black joy and, carrying the legacy of resilience and resistance that has been passed down through the generations. And so, yes, they are impacted, but they are still surviving.
So this then brings us to this notion here of understanding education, past and present. Conventional education, we have to keep this in mind, is socially and culturally constructed. One thing that we don't take into consideration when you're talking about that, someone mentioned about the Black excellence, is that, and according to, I would say, from a Western perspective, North American perspective specifically, that formalized education began in like 1633 or something like that. Yet people fail to acknowledge that if we go back to even Timbuktu, to thousands of years ago, we had originally established thriving, healthy Black educational systems, universities, that others who, prior to pre-colonial contact, would come to learn about the greatness in medicine, education, the advanced technologies, and the list goes on and on and on. So the system, fast forward now to 2021, what we're talking about and focusing on is this notion of something that has been socially and culturally constructed, because all of those things that I just mentioned, which is really just the tip of the iceberg, are things that our school system in North America and even throughout the world fails to acknowledge. The system that we are immersed in right now, it controls whose knowledge is valued and what gets distributed within these systems. And it normalizes and affirms and actually privileges, centers Eurocentric, patriarchal, class beliefs and approaches. And it also points out who they deem to have worthiness and significance, and they control that. And so continuing down this line of, going back to Canadian history, which is really important. Again, think about Sankofa. We're going back to get something in order to move forward so we have a better understanding. In the late 80s and 90s, there was a professor, a Canadian psychologist, who was at Western University. His name is Philip Rushton, and he had focused his research on race and intelligence and race and crime. His research was highly problematic because what it simply did was he aimed to try to prove the genetic and intellectual inferiority of Blacks. And he used, unfortunately, the social sciences to fuel the politics of overt racism. And, it added to another layer of the mistreatment that Black children's academic abilities and intelligence were continuously being questioned by school officials. This has not ended. This continues to persist. So what's the problem here? Well, we're about to fill you in with some information that should have been taught to all of us, yet most people can get away from going from kindergarten to high school, even post-secondary, without ever saying this one word or talking about it. It's race. And we need to recognize that race is a social construct with significant implications in education. And I love this quote from Maya Angelou, and it's actually an excellent analogy, especially with what we're experiencing right now, when she talks about this thing called racism, and that the plague of racism is that it's insidious, entering into our minds as smoothly and quietly and invisibly as floating airborne microbes enter in our bodies to find lifelong purchase in our bloodstreams.
So Olamide, can you launch our second poll question, please? Thank you. Have you been formally taught about the history of race as a social construct? Oh, the answers are flying in. This is great. All right, so 17% of you said yes, 83% said no. Thank you for your responses. Can you stop sharing, Olamide? I can't get it off my screen. There we go.
Okay, so you're in luck because today you're going to get the education that you should have had on this notion of race. And we start off with this notion of race because when we're talking about being anti-racist, that's the first principle, which is understanding, recognizing that, again, race is a social construct, no scientific merit, but has a huge social effect. Hence, we're seeing, anti-Black racism and some of the other isms that are in existence as well. So in his book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, Kendi points out that Latinx and Asian and African and European and Indigenous and Middle Eastern are, well, their power identities linked to what? A power construct. Such as race. And what it does is it categorizes and judges, it elevates and it downgrades, it includes and it excludes others based on perceived monolithic races. So how did this thing called race start? Well, this can be explored using a pie analogy. So to create race, what one needs is to engage in a process of what Kendi calls race making. This would be the crust of the pie. And then next, you fill in the crust with the negative qualities and descriptors that dehumanizes Black people. You see there as examples. I'm not necessarily going to read it, and I'm sure many of us, we have heard this, or we've come across this, or maybe we've even been told some of these things. And that is, again, a huge problem. Then following that, we would solidify these dehumanizing notions by sharing it through text, books, videos, media, right? And embed these false notions into state-sanctioned policies, practices, and procedures within institutions such as education, child welfare, media, justice systems, as well as the healthcare system, to name a few. And then how do you fully solidify it even more so? Repeat, while always ensuring the erasure of any sort of history of greatness of Blacks, which is why Black excellence and the intentional teaching about that is huge. So going back to this thing here with race, in the 1400s, you had a person by the name of Prince Henry the Navigator, and he was the first person to construct race and racist power. He also was one of the first to exclusively trade enslaved Africans. He is also known for his sponsored Atlantic voyages to West Africa, where he would bring back enslaved Africans back to Portugal. Notice that I'm saying enslaved Africans, not just slaves. It was an act that was forced upon people, not necessarily anything else. And so by highlighting enslaved, it is that reminder of this was something that was thrusted upon us as opposed to anything else. So as he was on his journeys, he also had a royal chronicler with him. And we know the power of visuals, but we also understand the power of words. And so the Gomez du Zurara, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but within the mid 1400s, what he essentially did was he captured and chronicled these voyages that Prince Henry the Navigator had sponsored. And within his descriptors, again, you can see on the slide what it says. Within his descriptors, he used language to group people into a particular group, and he would use language that were either affirming of some identities, and for those who identify as Black, dehumanizing. However, and my background is actually in science, and so I'm a little bit surprised that this was not explicitly shared, but yet we see the outcome of that. Carl Linnaeus in 1735, he has his book Systema Naturae. He was the first person to color code races and group them in a hierarchy where you see Homo sapiens europaeus at the top, and then at the bottom are Homo sapien afer. And if you take a look at the descriptors, you can see how as you go from top to bottom or bottom to top, that from top to bottom, we have positive, what seems to be neutral, sort of descriptors, but as we move down this hierarchy to Homo sapiens aferis, which is referring to Black, that language is still being used to describe people who identify as Black. And when you have the power of language like that, that in turn is justifying, and I put justifying in quotations, the harm that continues to be experienced by those who identify as Black. And since 1735, and again, it's 2021, we continue to be locked into this social construct, keeping in mind that race is not neutral. But similar to what, Camilla had mentioned about, it's not necessarily just about sitting in that spot of hopelessness. I want to share with you, going down with this timeline here, of when you're talking about Black greatness, Dr. Chester Pierce, who is a Black psychiatrist, and he's one of the founding presidents of the Black Psychiatrists of America. He actually was a senior advisor for Sesame Street. I know Sesame Street is people are like, whoa, why are you mentioning Sesame Street, right? When I think about Sesame Street in the 70s, that was something that I fondly had enjoyed watching, but not realizing what the impact that it had on myself and also on others, but also some of the brilliance that's behind it. I want you to keep in mind thinking about the timeline within the 1960s, where you have many prominent Black civil rights activists being assassinated. Where we're seeing, and it was mentioned in 1964 here in Ontario, with that Ontario Schools Act being rescinded, now making segregation illegal, but yet segregation still persisted. We had Dr. Chester Pierce, what he recognized and acknowledged was that media, although at the time in 1970s, not every household had a TV, he recognized that more and more people were having that. And so with that in mind, and with the show Sesame Street, and this surprises a lot of people, but I would also highly recommend that you check out a person who I'm about to mention, Dr. Loretta Long. She also goes by the name of Susan, and she is the lady who is the circle around her head there. She's a phenomenal dissertation and doctoral dissertation you can take a look at. But Sesame Street was actually used as a tool against racism. And it was created in a manner where it was helping to build up the self-worth of Black children through the intentional presentation of positive Black images within a racially and socially economic integrated environment. And again, it was to provide counter narratives and beliefs that people held outside and justified the dehumanizing treatment of people who are Black. And so Dr. Loretta Long in 1973, she actually was showing how the Sesame Street classroom was used to combat educational racism, which is an aspect of institutional racism. And she said that this was achieved by essentially incorporating what she calls a hidden curriculum. And so most of us know that when we are, as educators, teaching, we have a curriculum that we are supposed to be teaching, based on grade, based on subject matter discipline, whatever the case may be. However, there's also another curriculum that is being operating at the same time that has an even greater unintended impact on our youth, and that's the hidden curriculum. It's what people do, what people say, what people don't say that conveys to them whether they have worth or no worth. The list goes on and on and on. And so what they did with Sesame Street was they incorporated this hidden curriculum actually in a good way and sought to bolster the Black and other racialized children's self-respect by creating a familiar space where they lived, where their lived experience was valued, by having a positive, racially diverse and integrated cast that looked like them, by providing an equal role for all children solving problems. But the objective was not to have just Black children and other racial children be affirmed, but it was also to have non-Black children acquire some knowledge of the multiracial, multicultural world in which they live in order for them to have some sort of understanding of and appreciation for the contributions of cultures other than their own. And even more importantly, to support them with appreciating differences rather than fearing them. And then we have Dr. Afua Cooper, where you can take a look. She's a phenomenal spoken word poet laureate, and also I believe she's a current professor at Dalhousie University. And she, in the 1980s, I believe, while she was at Ryerson, she was who coined the term anti-Black racism. And so, with all of this information, we share this with you because the bottom line is this: that due to the intentional omission of the history of race, what can be inferred is that we are actually all complicit in upholding systemic racism unless that we are intentionally being anti-racist.
I'm going to share a few thought bubbles with you that represent statements that, although taken from the education system, can apply to anyone. And really what they represent are statements made by, staff in schools or maybe in other institutions or even people in your life that are used to justify not taking action when they witness incidents of anti-Black racism. So the first one is, I don't see color. I only see students and grades. I promote empathy and kindness in my classroom. I don't feel comfortable enough. I need training. This one, I want to kind of take a pause and just offer that it is very easy to become a perpetual learner of anti-Black racism and anti-racist theory and any other sort of training as it relates to oppression. And really, it is time to move beyond the learner stage and take even the smallest of steps to address anti-Black racism and other forms of oppression. Getting stuck in that learner space can be challenging because there are so many different theories, so many different perspectives, and it can feel as though you are immobilized. But it is okay to fail forward. It's actually appreciated that you're not just sitting in a space of perpetual learning, but actually moving towards doing. And as Nicole said, it's getting ready to be ready is the learning part. A lot of us are already ready. Let's take some steps towards equity. How do I have the right to intervene? I don't want to cause a scene. If I don't respond right away, I might be reprimanded. And so it's easy to get stuck also in that place of, feeling compelled to act, but not knowing what to do. In this circumstance, you can cause harm. And so it makes sense if you are in an institution that there is an anti-racism policy that specifically speaks to anti-Black racism and how you can respond when incidents like that happen. This is the administrator's job. Nope, it's everyone's work. Everyone is responsible for addressing anti-Black racism. They're nice kids. They were just joking. But jokes can cause a lot of harm. I don't want to ruin my relationship with the students. And to that, I would say that your relationship with students or other young people in your life that see these incidents going unaddressed is already ruined. So are you trying to, build positive relationships and, affirm the identities of all students? Or are you looking to preserve relationships of the few by not disrupting anti-Black racism? We all have a choice to make here. So what can we do? At the beginning of this presentation, we encouraged everyone to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You can get serious about moving from learning to action. And also get serious about how we can deepen our knowledge related to anti-Black racism. And this is a perfect opportunity of how that can happen. If I don't see race, I can't recognize racism. If I can't recognize racism, I can't be anti-racist. If I can't be anti-racist, I participate in racism. This is where colorblindness gets us, racism. So this is something that I, read in the hopes that everyone who's participating here will reflect. We're butting up almost against the 7:30 kind of cutoff point for our presentation. And so I will encourage you to reflect on what it means to approach this world and your interactions with others through a lens of colorblindness. It means that you can't fully acknowledge who they are and their experiences and how that informs the way they move through the world. So this is a video that we were hoping to show.
Yeah, I did share the link with our moderator. Yes, I did.
I will stop.
Yeah, so while we're setting up the video, I just want to provide a little bit of a background information with regards to this. So, when we talk again about ending off with that Black joy and Black greatness, we wanted to be very intentional to share with you a speech. It's not that long. It is a spoken word, and it is by Donovan Livingston. In 2016, he was an educator, an elementary school educator, and he also chose to do his master's, and he did his Master of Education at Harvard University. And he was also the one who was sharing the convocation speech. And so we wanted to share this with you, and we wanted you to pay close attention to, because as a young Black male, he is a survivor of the system itself. He embodies so much and more. He is hope and truth and resistance and so much more wrapped into one body. And we wanted you to end off our presentation on a high note. And please, again, feel free to be able to access that presentation. You can go on YouTube in terms of his spoken word, but we want to make sure that we infuse a little bit of Black joy. So if we could go ahead and start it from the beginning, that would be really great.
Teacher, good afternoon. Good afternoon. How's everyone doing today? Good, good. So greetings, friends, family, faculty, staff, alumni, and the illustrious class of 2016. Make some noise. So my name is Donovan Livingston, and I came to address you in the best way I know how, but you have to forgive me. I have to take this moment in for a little while. When I spoke in my high school graduation several years ago, my high school English teacher threatened to replace me on the program or cut my microphone when she found out that I was interested in doing a poem as a part of my remarks. So I am eternally grateful for being able to share this piece of myself in my most authentic voice with you this afternoon. So, spoken word poetry, it insists on participation. So if you feel so compelled, snap, clap, throw up your hands, rejoice, celebrate. Class of 2016, this is your address and this is your day. Education, then, beyond all other devices of human origin, is a great equalizer of the conditions of men. Horace Mann, 1848. At the time of his remarks, I couldn't read, I couldn't write. Any attempt to do so, punishable by death. For generations, we have known of knowledge's infinite power, yet somehow we have never questioned the keeper of the keys, the guardians of information. Unfortunately, I've seen more dividing and conquering in this order of operations, a heinous miscalculation of reality. For some, the only difference between a classroom and a plantation is time. How many times must we be made to feel like quotas, like tokens and coined phrases, diversity, inclusion? There are days I feel like one, like only, a lonely blossom in a briar patch of broken promises, but hey, I've always been a thorn in the side of injustice, disruptive, talkative, a distraction with a passion that transcends the confines of my own consciousness, beyond your curriculum, beyond your standards. I stand here, a manifestation of love and pain, with veins pumping revolution. I am the strange fruit that grew too ripe for the poplar tree. I am a dream act, dream deferred, incarnate, and a movement, an amalgam of memories America would care to forget. My past alone won't allow me to sit still, so my body, like my mind, cannot be contained. As educators, rather than raising your voices over the rustling of our chains, take them off, uncuff us, unencumbered by the lumbering weight of poverty and privilege, policy and ignorance. I was in the 7th grade when Ms. Parker told me, Donovan, we could put all of your excess energy to good use. And she introduced me to the sound of my own voice. She gave me a stage, a platform. She told me that our stories are the ladders that make it easier for us to touch the stars. So climb and grab them. Keep climbing, grab them. Spill your emotions in the Big Dipper and pour out your soul. Light up the world with your luminous allure. To educate requires Galileo-like patience. Today, when I look my students in the eyes, all I see are constellations. If you take the time to connect the dots, you can plot the true shape of their genius shining in their darkest hour. I look each of my students in the eyes and see the same light that aligned Orion's belt in the pyramids of Giza. I see the same twinkle that guided Harriet to freedom. I see them. Beneath their masks and their mischief exists an authentic frustration and enslavement to your standardized assessments. At the core, none of us were meant to be common. We were born to be comets, darting across space and time, leaving our mark as we crash into everything. A crater is a reminder that something amazing happened right here, an indelible impact that shook up the world. Are we not astronomers searching for the next shooting star? I teach in hopes of turning content into rocket ships, tribulations into telescopes, so a child can see their true potential from right where they stand. And injustice is telling them they are stars without acknowledging the night that surrounds them. Injustice is telling them education is the key while you continue to change the locks. Education is no equalizer. Rather, it is the sleep that precedes the American dream. So wake up, lift your voices until you've patched every hole in a child's broken sky. Wake up, every child, so they know of their celestial potential. I've been the black hole in a classroom for far too long, absorbing everything without allowing my light to escape, but those days are done. I belong among the stars, and so do you. And so do they. Together, we can inspire galaxies of greatness for generations to come. So no, sky is not the limit. It is only the beginning. Lift off.
Wasn't that amazing? Oh my gosh, I get like chills every time I watch it. We are right at 7:30, Nicole. Like, we could not have planned this better. And what an amazing way to end our time together. We are so grateful to everyone that was here to learn from and with us. And we hope that you will take the information that we have shared today with you on your journey as you intentionally work to disrupt anti-Black racism in every space in which you work and live. We had another poll question. I think it is fair. Should we launch it, Nicole, in our last like 30 seconds? Okay.
Sure.
All right. All right, thank you so much, everyone that voted. Most of you, or it's about 50-50 split in terms of active learner and leading with intention. And some of you are like fully engaged in this work. So again, we thank you for being here. We hope that you are able to take away something from this presentation that you can input or implement into your lives. And have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camilla and Nicole. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.